Have you ever looked at your parents and wondered when they became adults? Not legally, but emotionally. At what point did they suddenly learn how to make difficult decisions, handle disappointment, manage responsibilities, and navigate the countless uncertainties of life? As children, we often assume there must have been a moment when our parents figured everything out. We imagine adulthood as a destination, a place where confusion disappears and certainty finally takes its place. But what if that belief is one of the greatest illusions we carry from childhood? What if the people who raised you were never completely sure of what they were doing? What if, beneath the confidence they showed the world, they were simply trying to survive, adapt, and make the best choices they could with the knowledge they had at the time? For most of our lives, we see our parents through the eyes of a child. They're the ones who explain the world, set the rules, solve problems, and somehow keep life moving forward. When something breaks, they fix it. When we are afraid, they reassure us. When we have questions, they provide answers. From a child's perspective, this creates the impression that parents possess a level of certainty that ordinary people do not. They appear stronger, wiser, and more capable than everyone else. Yet this perception says more about childhood than it does about adulthood. Children need stability, and parents often become symbols of that stability, even when they do not feel stable themselves. The strange thing about growing older is that one day you reach the age your parents were when they were raising you. Suddenly, a number that once seemed impossibly mature begins to feel surprisingly young. You remember your father buying a house at 35 or your mother raising children at 28, and you realize that you are now standing at the same point in life. The shock comes when you discover that you do not feel like the fully developed adult you once imagined. You still question your decisions. You still make mistakes. You still worry about the future. You still find yourself uncertain about things you thought adulthood would automatically teach you. And in that moment, a realization quietly emerges. Perhaps your parents felt exactly the same way. This realization is often uncomfortable because it forces us to reconsider the narrative we have built around our parents. Throughout childhood, it is tempting to believe that they acted the way they did because they knew better. If they were strict, they must have had a good reason. If they made mistakes, those mistakes must have been exceptions. If they appeared confident, it must have been because they truly understood what they were doing. However, adulthood gradually reveals a more complicated truth. Many decisions are made without complete information. Many choices involve uncertainty. Sometimes people simply choose the option that seems least risky and hope it works out. What once looked like certainty may have been nothing more than courage in the face of uncertainty. Perhaps one of the most profound shifts that occurs with age is learning to see your parents as individuals rather than roles. Before they became your parents, they were people with ambitions, insecurities, fears, and dreams. They had private struggles that had nothing to do with you. They experienced heartbreak, disappointment, failure, and confusion long before you entered their lives. Yet children rarely think about this. We tend to view our parents as characters in our own story rather than as protagonists in stories of their own. It is only later that we begin to understand the complexity of the lives they were living behind the scenes. Consider, for a moment, how much pressure many parents carry. They are expected to provide financial stability, emotional support, guidance, protection, and consistency. Society often treats these expectations as ordinary, yet they are enormous responsibilities. Parents are frequently required to make decisions that affect an entire family while having no guarantee that those decisions are correct. They worry about money, health, education, relationships, and the future. They carry fears they rarely express because they believe it is their responsibility to appear strong. The paradox is that the people who seem most confident are often the ones carrying the greatest uncertainty. What makes this realization even more powerful is recognizing that many parents were dealing with challenges their children never saw. A child may remember a father who seemed distant, while never knowing the stress he carried at work. A daughter may remember a mother who appeared constantly worried, without understanding the financial pressure that existed behind closed doors. A son may remember arguments between his parents without realizing how much effort it took for them to keep the family together. Childhood provides only a partial view of reality. As adults, we gain access to details that were once hidden from us, and those details often transform the way we interpret the past. Of course, understanding your parents does not mean idealizing them. One of the dangers of maturity is confusing empathy with denial. Some parents made serious mistakes. Some caused emotional wounds that lasted for years. Some failed to provide the support their children needed. Acknowledging their humanity does not erase those realities. In fact, genuine understanding requires us to hold two truths at the same time. Our parents may have loved us deeply, and they may have hurt us. They may have tried their best, and their best may not always have been enough. Human beings are capable of both care and failure, often simultaneously. This complexity can be difficult to accept because simplicity is emotionally comfortable. It is easier to divide people into categories of right and wrong, good and bad, victim and villain. Yet real life rarely follows such neat boundaries. Most people exist somewhere in between. They make admirable decisions in some moments and regrettable ones in others. They act out of wisdom one day and fear the next. The older we become, the more we recognize this contradiction within ourselves. And once we see it in ourselves, it becomes easier to recognize it in our parents. There is another reason this realization matters. Many of us spend years carrying resentment toward our parents for not being who we needed them to be. Sometimes that resentment is justified. Sometimes it protects us from pain. However, there comes a point when understanding becomes more liberating than blame. Seeing our parents as imperfect human beings does not excuse every mistake they made, but it allows us to stop measuring them against impossible standards. We begin to understand that they were not competing against perfection. They were competing against exhaustion, fear, limited resources, personal struggles, and the unpredictability of life itself. Ironically, one of the signs that we are growing up is realizing how difficult parenting must be. Even people without children often reach this conclusion as they take on greater responsibilities. Managing a career is difficult. Maintaining healthy relationships is difficult. Caring for your own mental well-being is difficult. Balancing all of these responsibilities at once can feel overwhelming. When we imagine doing all of that while also being responsible for another human being, the challenge becomes almost unimaginable. Suddenly, many of the decisions our parents made begin to look different. What once seemed obvious becomes complicated. What once seemed easy becomes incredibly difficult. At some point, many people experience a moment that changes everything. It may happen during a conversation with an aging parent. It may happen while looking at old photographs. It may happen when hearing a family story that was never shared before. In that moment, the parent who once seemed larger than life becomes unmistakably human. You notice the sacrifices they never mentioned. You recognize the fears they never revealed. You understand the loneliness they sometimes carried. And perhaps for the first time, you see not a parent standing above you, but a person standing beside you. This shift in perspective can be surprisingly emotional. We spend so many years trying to earn our parents' approval that we rarely consider how much they may have doubted themselves. We assume they were evaluating us while forgetting that they were often evaluating themselves. Were they making the right choices? Were they providing enough? Were they protecting their children adequately? Were they succeeding or failing? Many parents carry these questions for decades. The difference is that children rarely witness those private moments of uncertainty. As our parents grow older, this realization often becomes impossible to ignore. The people who once guided us begin asking us for advice. The people who once appeared invincible begin showing signs of vulnerability. We notice the passage of time in ways we never did before. And with that awareness comes a deeper appreciation for everything they carried while trying to build a life. We understand that strength is not the absence of fear. More often, strength is the decision to continue despite fear. Perhaps that is the lesson hidden beneath this entire realization. Adulthood is not a state of complete understanding. It is not the moment when all confusion disappears. It is not the achievement of permanent certainty. Adulthood is learning how to move forward despite uncertainty. It is making decisions without guarantees. It is accepting responsibility without possessing all the answers. It is continuing to show up even when you feel lost. And when we finally understand this, we begin to see our parents differently. One day, you will realize that your parents were figuring life out too. They were not reading from a secret instruction manual. They were not operating with perfect knowledge. They were learning through trial and error, adapting to circumstances they could not always control, and doing their best to navigate a world that confused them just as much as it confuses everyone else. Some succeeded more gracefully than others. Some made mistakes they would later regret, but most were simply trying to find their way forward. And perhaps the most humbling part of all is recognizing that one day, someone may look at us in exactly the same way. They may assume we have everything figured out. They may believe we are certain when we are not. They may see confidence where there is actually doubt. And years later, they may come to the same realization we eventually reach about our parents, that we were never experts at life. We were simply human beings doing our best to understand it while we lived it.